Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Affordable Housing Program Compliance webinar. My name is Cindy Law. I'm on the AHP compliance team, and I review initial monitoring requests. I will be presenting today with my colleague Sharon, who will introduce herself now.
Hi, my name is Sharon Dawkins. I'm a part of the compliance team and I conduct the long-term monitoring reviews.
Thanks, Sharon. This presentation is being conducted remotely. Everyone is placed on listen-only mode and will be muted for the duration of the presentation. We appreciate your patience in advance if we encounter any technical difficulties. We emailed a copy of the presentation slides to everyone who registered for the webinar yesterday afternoon. If you did not receive the email, feel free to contact us and we can send you a copy of the presentation. Our contact information is at the end of the presentation. Now let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to discuss what to expect after the announcement of your AHP award and how to plan for a successful disbursement and initial monitoring review. We will be covering documentation requirements for disbursement and initial monitoring, maintaining the project's scoring commitments from the original application or any modifications, maintaining the project's need for subsidy and feasibility, basic requirements for the AHP retention documents, and common causes of noncompliance. Our goal is to avoid pitfalls that may cause the recapture of the AHP subsidy. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to add them to the Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen. We will read and respond to your questions during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Please do not use the chat box for questions, as that feature is harder for us to track responses. Just a quick reminder that in order to receive credit for the webinar attendance, an attendee needs to stay for the entire presentation, as mentioned in the webinar invitations. We also wanted to share that this Zoom webinar has closed captioning available. You can enable this at the bottom of the screen near the Q&A button if you want to enable closed captioning. After the announcement of an AHP award, a project has 4 years to complete construction. The bank tracks construction progress by asking sponsors and members to complete an online semi-annual survey twice a year until the project is deemed complete, which is defined as having all homebuyer loans in escrow closed and having the AHP subsidy fully dispersed. As it gets closer to the 4-year deadline, we will follow up on the semi-annual status report for more information on the project. If there is a change in staff, please notify the bank so we can update our records with the most current contact person's information. If there are significant changes in the project's characteristics, please notify the bank so that we may modify the project profile and rescore the project to ensure it remains eligible for AHP subsidy. The project must have good cause for any modification and must demonstrate why it cannot meet previous commitments, which includes changes in targeting. As of 2021, under our new regulation, sponsors must show that they have attempted to meet the original commitment for a reasonable period of time or demonstrate that a cure is not possible. The AHP procedures and policies are codified in our annual AHP implementation plan. In addition, the bank sends out special attention bulletins and notices when significant changes occur in the program. You can find these notices posted on our website under the Community Programs AHP section under Policy Updates. Next, we will cover award disbursement. Specifically, disbursement requests. When you are ready to request disbursement of the AHP subsidy, visit our website and review disbursement request instructions. We aim to review disbursements within 45 days, but this processing depends on the complexity of the disbursement and the responsiveness of the sponsor and member to additional questions. You must send a request to the bank to create a secure portal workspace by submitting the required forms available on our website prior to uploading documents electronically. Once the forms are submitted, please email the bank and let us know that the disbursement package is ready for review. We will cover electronic document submission later in the presentation. Disbursement requests can be made anytime after the award announcements are made. Keep in mind the minimum requirements for disbursement. For renovation or new construction projects, sponsors must have full site control, start of construction must be imminent, and all financing sources committed. For down payment assistance programs, we require homeowners be selected and income qualified. To process your disbursement request, we will review the project's financing and scoring commitments, project readiness, and the ability to complete the project within the 4-year timeline. Similar to the application review, the project must continue to demonstrate a need for subsidy, be financially feasible, and meet its original scoring commitments. The bank will review the updated financial workbook, which will include the final homebuyer worksheet, development budget, AHP benchmarks, and other documentation available to validate the project's scoring commitments. The most helpful document in the disbursement package is the disbursement request form, which provides a checklist and instructions on what is required for disbursement. This form can be found on the bank's website. Also, we will request any final documentation that is available at disbursement rather than waiting until initial monitoring to collect those documents. Once the AHP funds are dispersed to the member must deliver the AHP subsidy to the project owner within 30 days from the bank's funding date. It's very important to meet the 30 days grace period to avoid interest repayment to the bank. Now let's go over the information that will be requested at disbursement. For all projects, documentation validating land costs is required if it is not previously submitted at application. A completed signed HIQW, Household Income Qualification Workbook, and backup income documentation will be required for 10% of all homeowners in the project. For projects with only 2 units, documentation will be collected for both units. An estimated settlement statement must be provided for all home buyers currently in escrow. The bank also requires documentation for all previously closed escrows, including the final settlement statements, documentation for sources paid outside of closing, and final AHP retention documents, which include the AHP note and recorded deed of trust with AHP rider. For projects that are complete at the time of disbursement, additional documentation will also be required. For cost validation, backup documentation must be provided for 100% of sponsor-provided construction management costs and 35% of all other development costs. If there is a deficit in the budget, gap source documentation will also be required. If promotion of empowerment and community stability commitments are in place, documentation for those commitments must also be provided. I'm now going to pass it off to Sharon, who will be covering submitting documentation to the bank.
Thanks, Cindy. As mentioned earlier, the bank will only accept disbursement request documents electronically through a secure online portal hosted by BlackBerry Workspace. Due to information security concerns, documents submitted via Dropbox or other file sharing links will not be accepted. Prior to accessing the secure portal, An executed workspace setup request form must be provided by the member and sponsor for each project. This workspace used for disbursement initial monitoring is in addition to the workspace setup at application. Visit our website to review submission instructions and to download the workspace setup request form. Please send us an email when all disbursement documents have been uploaded to the appropriate folders. Now let's move on to initial monitoring. The AHP regulation requires the bank to monitor all projects. By signing the direct subsidy agreement, members and sponsors have agreed to the bank's monitoring requirements. We strongly encourage members to actively work with the project sponsors throughout the process so both parties are aware of changes early on. When the project is deemed complete, meaning construction is complete and the AHP subsidy is fully dispersed, and all homebuyers' loans have closed escrow, the bank will contact sponsor and member to start collecting materials for the initial monitoring review. This includes documentation that was not collected at disbursement. The sponsor and member will be notified by email. The bank will provide instructions on how to complete the initial monitoring materials, including the AHP Certificate of Member, the Financial Workbook, the AHP Household Income Qualification Workbook, and acceptable forms of verification for promotion of empowerment and community stability. And we'll go over those documents shortly. To prepare for disbursement and initial monitoring, we recommend creating an AHP file so that all AHP documents will be available from application to project completion, including homebuyer qualification documentation. The following slide will show a list of relevant documents. We recommend communicating the program requirements and application commitments to your asset manager, compliance staff, and especially those involved with empowerment services and income qualification. Now let's take a look at the workbook to go over the AHP income guidelines. The AHP Household Income Qualification Workbook is an instructional workbook that has 4 tabs as shown at the bottom of this slide. Tab 1 are guidelines. Tab 2 are the acceptable verification. Tab 3 shows instructions. And tab 4 is the actual household income qualification. The second tab outlines acceptable forms of income, assets, and ID verifications for each household member. The third tab lists step-by-step instructions on how to complete the bank's AHP income qualification worksheet. The fourth tab is the AHP Household Income Qualification Worksheet. It serves as an income certification form. Because it is an Excel worksheet, it also calculates and shows the math on how the household's income is calculated. Shaded areas are protected. Section 1, enter income qualification date, MSA region, and 100% AMI for the household. In Section 2, this lists all household members currently living at the same address. Tax returns or third-party documentation are required to validate all household member identification. Section 3, report all income earning assets of the household in this section. Check the small box if there are no assets to report. If total assets exceed $5,000, asset statements are required to validate what was reported. Section 4, note the reminder to use at least 2 calculation methods and choose the highest income projection. Household member number 1, employment income is estimated by using the hourly rate calculation based on information provided by the verification of employment. Household member number 2, employment income estimated by using year-to-date calculation based on pay stubs provided. This yields a higher income projection than using average pay per period calculations. A reminder that the first pay stub of the year is required to validate the start date. Household member number 3 is under 18 years old at the time of move-in. No income documentation required, as income from employment of children under the age of 18 does not constitute as annual income per the bank's income guidelines. Household member number 4 reported zero income. Therefore, a zero income affidavit or certification is required. At the bottom of the worksheet, there are 2 signature lines. Both the owner signature is required once the total income is determined. The owner and the signature's income is required once the income is determined. Remember, you can always refer to the instructions, which is the 3rd tab of the workbook, if you have questions on how to complete the HIQW. If you have any questions, please contact any of our compliance consultants for technical assistance. And now we'll move on to materials required for scoring.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This slide right here, the bank requires third-party documentation to validate the project's various scoring categories, such as targeting, empowerment services, and community stability. Depending on the project's completion status, documentation may be required at disbursement or initial monitoring. When preparing documentation for empowerment services and community stability, refer to the bank's website for a list of acceptable forms of verification. A final Excel workbook for all owner-occupied projects is required. For construction and rehab projects, we analyze the project's need for subsidy and feasibility by reviewing the homebuyer information worksheet and the development budget. If the home buyers are offered a 0% interest mortgage, the discounted financing worksheet will be required. Now let's take a look at the initial monitoring workbook. So this workbook contains 7 worksheet tabs, starting with workbook instructions and notes. We recommend reviewing the information within the instructions tab before completing the workbook. Also be sure to use the latest version of the workbook. The date and version number are shown in the top right corner of the instructions and notes page. The sample shown on this slide is the most current version and it is dated January 2024. Please do not use an older version from disbursement or application, as we will have to return it to you for updating. The link to the current workbook is also included in the initial email that you will receive. You may also find all updated AHP documents for initial monitoring and disbursement on the bank's website under Resources. The home buyer information is the second tab of the workbook. This worksheet contains information on each home buyer, including household income, purchase price, and loan payments. We review the information to ensure the project is meeting its income targeting and affordability commitments. The worksheet also calculates the project's sources of funds. Similar to the application workbook, the green shaded cells are locked from editing. The white cells are for data entry. Make sure the buyer's income information is consistent with what was reported on their income qualification worksheet. Also, information in the middle section of the worksheet should be consistent with the buyer's final closing statements. If the sponsor provided discounted permanent financing to the buyers, answer yes using the drop-down menu in the upper right section and complete the discounted financing worksheet. If the buyer's first loan was provided by USDA, also answer yes using the drop-down menu. Make sure you're using the most current version of the workbook available on the bank's website. Please check the date and the version located on the top right corner of the page. I'm now going to pass it back to Sharon, who will cover scoring.
Thanks, Cindy. Okay, now we're going to cover scoring. The project scoring commitments are outlined in the project's evaluation form attached to the direct subsidy agreement as Exhibit A. If there are any changes to these project characteristics, the project sponsor must notify the bank to ensure that there are no adverse effects on the overall project score, which would render the project ineligible for subsidy. Project modifications may be made to any of the scoring categories, including, but not limited to, donated property, targeting, promotion of empowerment, special needs, and large units. Empowerment services must be available to all buyers free of charge. Referral services will not be eligible for points. In addition to in-person services, empowerment services may now include digital services with a live person, such as phone calls with a service provider, Zoom meetings, and/or digital learning programs with a live person. These digital services must provide documentation or validation that they took place. If the sponsor is unable to provide one or more of the services committed at application, a modification to the type of service offered and possibly to the project score may be necessary.
Okay, modifications. If a project needs to make a modification to a scoring commitment, the bank will first request that the project sponsor or owner make a reasonable effort to cure any modification within a reasonable period of time, or provide an explanation of why care is not possible. The need for good cause remains. For example, if a project had initially targeted all units at below 65% AMI, but now wanted to sell homes to families above 65% AMI, a reasonable period of time would need to pass where the sponsor attempted to find below 65% AMI buyers. Those efforts would need to be documented before a modification could be processed to sell homes to a higher AMI buyer. One of the most common modifications and causes for noncompliance is when the project's final targeting does not match the original commitments. All units must be affordable as demonstrated by the housing expense ratios, which must be at or below 35% of the buyer's monthly income. At time of initial monitoring, we will ask for third-party backup documentation for a random sample of the units to ensure the actual household income and financing sources meet these requirements. Before uploading homebuyer documentation to the bank, please redact all confidential and personal information such as Social Security numbers, ID numbers, special needs information, and medical conditions. Please ensure that the date of birth is visible since we need this information to determine if income verifications are required. For construction or rehab projects, we also review the project's need for subsidy and financial feasibility at project completion. The Excel workbook includes a development budget like the workbook provided at time of disbursement. We compare the original budget from application to final actual costs. So be sure to include explanations for any line items that show significant variances. We check to ensure that the budget is balanced, where total uses of funds equal to the total sources of funds. 100% of the land costs and at least 35% of construction costs must be validated by third-party documentation. If the construction management is provided in-house, payroll history and copies of job description will need to be provided at initial monitoring. However, it's important to remember that land costs and in-house construction management costs will not be counted towards the 35 construction cost validation. Any AHP benchmarks will need to be explained and provide supporting backup documentation. Now let's move on to the development budget. The development budget or uses of funds worksheet compares the budget at application with the final actual costs. All development costs must be final, so select project complete using the drop-down menu at the top of the sheet and choose the building type. Any significant changes must be explained in the comments column to the right. We will request third-party documentation to validate the development budget, which includes the final settlement statement to validate the cost of land, final construction draw, or third-party invoices. Finally, please check the project sources equal to uses. If the budget does not balance, enter your explanation in the comment box at the bottom of this worksheet. If discounting financing is provided by the sponsor, an imbalance in the budget will occur, and you will need to complete the discounted financing worksheet as well. After completing the worksheets, check the benchmarks tab to make sure there are no deviations. The construction cost per square feet benchmark will need to be checked manually. For all benchmark deviation, a detailed quantifiable explanation and supporting documentation is required. For example, if there is an overage in the construction cost per square foot, we will need a quantifiable explanation of costs that are causing the deviation from the RS means in your area. We need to know the exact breakdown of overages from each development cost line item from the uses of funds worksheet with supporting backup documentation. Also check that your residential square footage is reflected correctly as it impacts costs. The RS means information can be found on the bank's website. The developer fee must be equal to or less than 15% of the total development cost. This increase is effective as of January 2022. Now I'm going to pass it back to Sharon to talk about AHP retention documents.
Thanks, Cindy. All projects must have a legally enforceable retention mechanism to secure the AHP subsidy for 5 years from project completion. Template documents are available on the bank's website under AHP Disbursement, Owner-Occupied section. When using the templates, make sure to use both the promissory note and the rider to the deed of trust. The member institution may use their own deed of trust. If the member does not use the bank's template, or if the template is altered, an opinion letter from the member's attorney is required. We also now have a specific retention document for let's see, for use on tribal lands to go along with our 5-point scoring category for Native housing, which was added in the 2022 application round. These documents do not need to be recorded, as they will still meet the AHP regulation requirement for a legally enforceable retention mechanism. Our template documents are available on the bank's website under AHP Disbursement Owner. Many of the areas in the document are editable to address different tribal needs. However, if the member does not use the bank's template, or if the template is altered in ways that are not allowed, an opinion letter from the member's attorney is required. And now I'll pass it back to Cindy.
Thanks, Sharon. The final topic today is noncompliance. The most common cause is when sponsors do not respond to the bank's initial monitoring request or are slow to respond. Also, the lack of documentation to support the project's need for subsidy and scoring categories, including income documentation, can cause the project to be non-compliant. Another common cause is when a project has not demonstrated a need for subsidy, which may be due to the sources being greater than uses, or if the developer fee exceeds 15% of the development costs. Either one of these issues could trigger a partial or full recapture of the AHP subsidy. In addition, if there are changes in the scoring categories that reduce a project's score to be below the round's lowest score, the project may be disqualified from that round, which would require a full recapture of the subsidy. If there are any significant changes in the project, it's imperative to communicate these changes with the bank staff as soon as possible and provide a care plan and good cause explanation so that we can work with you to ensure the project remains eligible for subsidy. Any modification that is not communicated to or approved by the bank prior to initial monitoring may cause the project to be non-compliant. In closing, we strongly recommend the use of the AHP retention templates to ensure compliance with AHP regulations. This concludes the presentation portion. If you have specific questions pertaining to your projects or any general questions, feel free to contact us by phone. If you're not sure who to contact, your questions can be sent through our general AHP email, and it will be forwarded to the appropriate staff member based on topic. We will now open up for questions and answers. If you do not have any questions, when you exit the webinar survey screen will pop up. You'll be asked to answer a few questions, which will take less than 2 minutes to complete. For those of you staying for the Q&A, please use the Q&A box located on the bottom of your screen, then enter your question in the message box and click send. We will read and respond to your questions accordingly. If you are interested in learning more about the other community investment programs or products, please visit our website to find out when other workshops and webinars are scheduled. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to attend. This concludes our presentation.